Hello, and welcome once again to a Beatles program called Things We Said Today. This is a weekly podcast, a talk show in which we talk about anything that has to do with the Beatles, any part of their history, what's going on today, sometimes what might be happening in the future. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the four regular co-hosts of the show. You might know me from my other Beatles program, a syndicated radio show called Every Little Thing. And I'm being joined by my three other regulars. First of all, contributing writer for Billboard magazine, also Access.com, that being Steve Marinucci. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
And also we have the senior editor for Beatle Fan magazine. He's been with them since the very beginning, that being Al Sussman. Hi, Al.
Hi, Ken. Hello there, everybody.
And also we have our resident musicologist who also writes for Beatle Fan and is a freelance writer, and for many years wrote for the New York Times in their classical department, and that's Alan Kozin. Hi, Alan.
Hey, Ken. Hello, everyone.
Well, this particular show is a very special one because we are celebrating 200 shows of Things We Said Today. And actually in the tradition of the Traveling Wilburys, whose second album was called Volume 3, this show is actually episode 202, but we're calling it our 200th episode. And what we thought we'd all do in the show this time is to look back at some of our favorite moments in the show. When we first started this program, it was just Steve and me, and it was basically a news-oriented show on the Beatles. And no one knows better than Steve how much the Beatles are in the news constantly, because that's what he does on a daily basis. And there's been nobody better at cranking out the news on the Beatles every single day than Steve. And then we
turning red. I'm turning red, Ken. Thank you.
Well, it's the truth. Who else does the kind of work that you do, and on a daily basis too? So we decided we were going to expand the show and have some more co-hosts, and that's when we invited Al and Alan to the program. So now we've made it to 200, really 202 shows, and so congratulations, guys. And we're going to talk about some of our favorite moments. So we've each picked a clip which represents for each of us a particular favorite moment. May not be our all-time favorite because there's so many shows to go through. But why don't we start with Alan? What was your favorite moment?
The one I picked, and it was really hard just sort of sampling through the first 200 shows, or 199, I think, when we did it. And I think I sent you a couple of potential clips. But the one that we settled on was Lawrence Juber. It was several months ago. I can't remember exactly when. It was within the past year. And he came along, and, apart from being really a fantastic guitarist with a lot of interesting music and recordings of his own, he obviously had a lot to tell us about what life was like in Wings. And I believe at one point in the interview, he talks about having gone from being a studio musician where, you come in every day, it's a different job. They put a part on your stand, you play what you're given, to going into a situation, like with Wings, where, you're not given a part, but you have some freedom to come up with your own ideas. Paul has ideas. And he put it in an interesting way, like, I was getting to learn what it was like to work with someone with that kind of ego. And I mean, when I say it, it sounds like it was a negative thing, but that's not the sense that came through when he said it, just as a different kind of situation. And so I asked about that, and he told us really what it was like to work in Wings in, I thought, a fairly concise way. So that was that clip. You recently did a video interview for Fretboard Journal. And one of the things that you mentioned was that during your Wings period, you were, to quote what you said, watching and learning and realizing how an artist like that functions. And I was wondering, how does an artist like that function?
Well, yeah, that's a very long conversation. I mean, basically, I'd gone to London University and I had a degree in music, and I had, these 3-4 years of solid studio work under my belt. But I had never really just had the luxury of being able to watch somebody on that level developing material, having the same kind of interaction that I was getting with Paul, and seeing how he would approach things. And, you know, like the very first session that I did was for a song called Same Time Next Year. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we recorded it, and that was my first session. Steve, Holly, and I, both of us, our first session with Wings, and we recorded it, and it was like, okay, well, you know, now we're going to put strings on this, and it's like seeing that process at work, and then going up to Scotland, and, you know, and we'd done that song, which was kind of a big movie type feeling to it, kind of very cinematic, even though I never got actually used in that movie because I think Marvin Hamlish ended up scoring it. Then the next thing we did was the song To You on Back to the Egg, which was, you know, very edgy. And the range, I mean, going from doing some, you know, very big kind of My Love type, you know, cinematic McCartney song to doing this very edgy kind of punky rock thing was such a strong contrast. And then in the course of recording, like there was one day where Paul said, you know, we're not going to work on the album today. I want to do some Rupert demos. And we spent a day demoing songs for, you know, this proposed Rupert the Bear movie. And it was just how broad, in his case, how broad his palette was, and how easy it was for him to switch gears from one style to another. And because there was this kind of uber consciousness of this artistic consciousness that wasn't just driven by being in one genre, but by being an artist and a musician and a multi-instrumentalist and a producer and being able to wear many hats, some of them at the same time. Mm-hmm. And being in the course of it, I mean, you know, one would assume that there's a very strong ego at work there, which there is, but a very collaborative ego too. So it was, you know, a head that wore many hats, but it never really felt like it was too big, as it were. Following through on the metaphor.
Yeah, I was wondering how collaborative that ego was. I mean, you were used to, as a session musician, being, and certainly also as one who reads, being given a chart, and this is what you play, and this is when you play it, and that was really the job of being a session musician. But in a band like Wings, how much room did you have to create your own lead lines, or did he suggest more or less what he wanted? Did you feel free to bring your own ideas to the tracks?
There was a lot of freedom. I think that, you know, being a studio musician had trained me in coming up with guitar parts, because even though very often you're handed something that's written, there's also a certain amount of freedom to kind of invent the in-between licks or just find exactly the right rhythm groove or whatever. And with Wings, the freedom was there. I mean, there weren't that many occasions when Paul said, you have to play this. Now, there were certain times, for example, you know, with the riff to Old Siam Sir, I mean, that was written into the song. Or, you know, the basic kind of groove of Spin It On. But when it came to the solos, for example, I was given really a lot of leeway. And I was very happy to have that. And that really continued. I mean, there were only a few occasions where Paul said, I want you to play this. And that was, you know, times when things had been written in. They were really part of the song. Like, in Daytime, Nighttime Suffering, there's a little guitar lick that he said, this is what I want. Or, you know, on Coming Up, this is the guitar lick that the whole thing is based on. And so, you know, that's compositional rather than more kind of musical direction where there's that certain freedom to be able to inject your own personality. I think the area where I felt like I was pushing the envelope was more in terms of the live show, because Paul's not big on, you know, kind of extended guitar solos. So I really had to kind of pick my moments and really try and kind of put my voice in there in my own way. So when we did Let It Be, for example, I wasn't trying to be George. I was trying to, you know, bring my sensibility to the solo on that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the studio environment, I mean, I really felt that the freedom was there. And, and the reality is if you didn't get it right, Paul could always pick up the guitar and do it himself.
Right. That's true. Okay, thanks. Steve?
Are you surprised that, just getting a little more general with Paul Lawrence, are you surprised he's still, to use the phrase of the tour, out there? Are you surprised he's still going as hard as he is?
Not really, because I think he loves to perform. I think he really, that's always, being on stage is just so much built into his DNA. And I think that, one could look at it that maybe there's a sense that, if not now, when? Because, if he stops doing it now, he's probably not going to do it again in 5 years. I mean, let's just keep going while the going's good. And he's got a big machine set up there. I mean, once you put that machine together, you want to keep it oiled, otherwise, you have to start over. And it's not easy to put together a show of that scope and to have to have such a tight band and such a tightly put together stage show with all of that rigging. I mean, I can't imagine how many man hours it takes to put together his staging.
Right.
And I think it's working, so why not? And it's not like he has, whereas in 1980 it was like, I got busted in Japan. Now, we don't want to take the kids out of school. I don't want to be, dealing with, immigration and all of that stuff. And he didn't travel for another nearly 10 years. Whereas over the years, he kind of gradually started to ramp it back up. And now, it's what he does. And I think it's great that he's doing it, and he's certainly satisfying his audiences. He puts on a great show, and there's no shortage of material. He's never going to run out of tunes to play live.
That's absolutely true. Ken?
Lawrence, you were just talking about how, in your view, you looked at Wings as being a very collaborative type of effort. Do you separate the Wings period from post-Wings, Paul? Is it all? There are some people who think no matter what, it's Paul's music no matter what. And he still could be collaborative with all the people that he worked with on all of the solo albums anyway. So do you view the Wings period as being something that is separate from everything else that he did in his post-Beatles career? And why?
Well, the short answer is yes, because in my view, Wings was not Paul's band, it was Paul and Linda's band. And as much as, Linda made her contribution in some very specific ways that, I found her to be very much part of the rock and roll heart of the band. Because Paul can go in a very pop direction. And the reality is that, Wings' biggest hits in the 70s were pop hits. Whether it's, Listen to What the Man Said, Let 'Em In, My Love. This wasn't, the big hits weren't really the hard rock side of the band. But Linda kept things rocking, from my perspective. And her voice was also a very integral part. Hers and Denny's and Paul's voices blending were very much that strong backing vocal sound that you identify with those hit records. Just as much as, the sound of the Bee Gees records or 10cc or those bands in the 70s that used a very strong vocal ensemble sound. And so, she was very integral to it, even though she got a lot of criticism for her, supposed lack of musicianship. She made up for it in other ways. And I think that by the time we got Back to the Egg, I think she was starting to disengage because, James was a baby. She now had 4 kids. They'd done the big world tour thing. And then Paul getting busted, which, of course, came after the album. But it was a progression to the point where Wings really ceased to become that entity. And then Paul went on, to be doing Paul records. And yes, Linda may have been involved, but it wasn't the same level of involvement as with Wings, where she was a constant presence.
All right. So what did you guys think, looking back on that clip with Lawrence Juber? How about you, Al?
He always has a very interesting take on the whole Wings experience, maybe a little bit different from any of the other members of the group. And but it's always a very intelligent take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I found very interesting about it was what he had to say about Linda's contribution.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm.
And I think it's really true if you look back at Paul's entire post Beatles career, there is a big difference between the Wings period and post Wings as far as Linda's contribution because there was much more of a presence with Linda on Wings records. Not that there wasn't one with the solo stuff, but you can definitely hear more harmonies. You definitely felt like she was more a part of the recordings right there.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, because she had a particular harmony sound that really. In fact, it's weird. There's a story that around the time when Run Devil Run came out, I'm not sure if I've told this before, but there are a couple of tracks on Run Devil Run where there are some harmony parts that sound very much like Linda. And of course, it can't be because the album was recorded a year after she passed. And somebody had mentioned that to Paul, and he had said, yeah, that he noticed it himself.
Hmm.
So definitely she had a very she was very much a part of the sound of Wings.
I think what I found interesting about what he said about her is that she was the one pushing them towards the rock stuff.
Yes, exactly.
And, yeah, so that surprised me. I don't know why it surprised me. I guess it kind of makes sense, but he has that duality. He's the rock screamer and also the gentle balladeer, and she was pushing for the one side.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's always interesting to see how various people work with which we'll hear again, but it's really interesting to hear these kind of perspectives that you wouldn't normally otherwise know, and Lawrence's was at a very interesting time. So that actually we don't hear a lot about. So yeah, I mean it's really, especially from somebody like him who's such a professional.
I always say if you want the full perspective of what an artist is like to work with, you interview all the people around that person. And so the more people that you hear from, then you'll get a fuller appreciation. And certainly just from the Wings period, I've interviewed most of the other members of Wings. They all have something different to say. So, and definitely Lawrence has a very positive perspective of it all. And, the whole thing about Linda, it's funny because I noticed that even though Linda, you don't feel her presence as much after Wings, after she passed away, I really noticed a difference in Paul's music. I felt like something was missing. And it really makes you realize how much a part she had to do with that sound. And like what you said, Al, the harmonies. I mean, the Wings days, it was Paul, Linda, and Denny, and they were so much part of that sound, the blending of those voices. And there are certain songs you can easily cite, with a little luck and silly love songs and
listen to what the man said.
Sure, those songs.
Yeah,
and it's just not there. After Linda passed away, you noticed a big difference. At least I did, anyway. All right, so why don't we move on now to Steve and the clip that you picked?
Well, this kind of segues very nicely with the Lawrence clip because it's our interview with Rusty Anderson. That was from 2013. I can't believe it was that long ago, but it was. And we caught him, as I recall, in between shows. They were still on tour, but we got him in between shows. We were really lucky to get him. And he talked about how they played together on stage, how the current band works on stage, which, if you've seen the band or if you will see the band, for example, this week, you will see this in play. And I don't recall that I've ever heard that many descriptions from the band. I know, when I talked to Brian Ray, I heard some of it. But I mean, what Rusty's comments were really interesting for me, so
Yeah.
that's why I picked him.
So why don't we hear the clip from Rusty Anderson? Can you go through one thing I've always been curious about when you're dealing with songs that are classics, and so many of these songs are, especially the Beatles songs and certain solo songs that everybody knows. Is there a tendency for you to say, I've got to be loyal to the way George Harrison played it or the way it was on the record, or does Paul just let you have freedom to do whatever you want?
Well, it's sort of a hybrid. I mean, I think that one of the reasons that this band has been together a long time and worked well is because everyone kind of gets it. They sort of, I think their perspective, and certainly mine, is like, you want to honor the classic arrangements of these songs because they're so brilliant, but you also don't want to just karaoke it and just do everything exactly, like copy every nuance. I mean, I think it's important. There's a multitude of aspects going on. One is it's important to put one's personality into the moment of the event of playing the song, because it's a live performance, and we don't have a click track going on. We don't have computers playing stuff. It's not machine music, and a lot of the music that you hear live is that way.
Right.
A lot of drummers out there, you see a drummer, but he's actually got a little thing in his ear and a little click track going, and everything's on a grid, and all these other instruments are playing things. That's the opposite of what we are. We're an organic band. And I think that, I mean, if the Beatles were alive today and they were playing these songs, or Wings or whoever, that it wouldn't be this, like, sort of carbon copy approach to making the music. It's more about sort of making it work in a live medium and having that urgency. And I think that it's important to keep that feel going. And so I think, the response has been pretty great as far as I think our interpretations of the song. And it's sort of walking that line of being respectful and also not being too respectful to the point of, just being a carbon copy.
Right. Is there an unknown every night when you go out there that you don't know what you're going to be, what everybody else is going to be doing, and you kind of play off that?
We'll make mistakes. We'll start songs again. Well, it's actually kind of loose. I mean, there's a lot of focus, and I think when you're on the road and you play a lot, and you get pretty tight. But there's also a time when maybe someone will misread the set list, or we've done some funny things. But it's always cool. There's a nice. It seems to be that there's a good vibe in the audience when those moments happen, because everyone knows then it's actually live, and that they're seeing something that isn't the same exact thing every night.
Right.
And there's also improvised solos. I'll go up and do things different. I mean, it's a little different every night. I never.
And that's what keeps it fresh.
Exactly the same performance any 2 nights, or certainly Paul doesn't.
Yeah.
As much as you can say, what's the process of adding to the set list? I think you said before when we talked that you guys do have input, that it's not just Paul making.
Yeah. I used to be a little more assertive about my opinion, and just try to nudge Paul. Hey, we should do blah blah blah, or this, and I suggested, say, Too Many People, or Day Tripper, Getting Better, Helter Skelter, things like that. But as time's gone on, I've seen how you could ask a million people what the set list should be, and you'd get a million different responses. Everyone from the super fans to the the sort of occasional listeners have a different opinion about what songs they want to hear.
Right.
And so, you can't be too the word myopic about it, because it's not that kind of a thing. And I mean, there's certain songs that I like better than others, but at the same time, it is a group committee kind of thing, because it's the committee of the whole audience and all around the world. It's the committee of the band, and ultimately Paul calls the shots, but I think he views it that way too, that he's not just doing it for himself, he's doing it for the whole, for the tour. So.
Did you guys, because one of the things, we did a whole show on the first show on the tour, and all the set list changes, and we were absolutely floored at some of the songs you guys brought in. We were very pleased. And
I was most surprised with being for the benefit of Mr. Kite.
Yeah, I know, I was too. That's something Paul just wanted to play. Like, cool. So then that took some work because it's such an elaborate arrangement of instruments and sounds that aren't very commonplace. So
Right.
Were you hearing what people were asking for, what the superfans were asking for, or did you guys just go in and say we're just going to change things up and do what sounds good?
I think it's a combo. I'm not even sure really. I know that a lot of people might write into Paul's website and ask for things, and they always making suggestions to me, and sometimes I go, oh yeah, that's a great idea, or sometimes they go, I've never heard that song, and then finally listen to it, and it's like maybe it's an okay song with an amazing vocal, or it's this cool song, but it's not really the right instrumentation for this band, or there's a lot of things, and plus Paul has so many songs,
That's right.
so many records. I mean, it's the output is ridiculous. You could play all these songs, these obscure songs, but most people wouldn't know them. Most people in the audience know the songs that got radio airplay.
Right.
So, which is a lot of them already. I mean, you just take the hits and you're done. You don't have to look any farther, which is unusual because most artists aren't that, endowed with with hit songs.
He's had a lot of hits that he's never done live still.
Exactly.
Can we expect setlist changes down the road, and can we also expect a recording or a DVD?
Setlist
Can you
changes.
say anything?
It always morphs, but it depends how long it takes.
Okay.
The set list, from one, it might even be called the same tour, but there might be a couple of different songs or whatever. I mean, I know that this tour out there, there's been a lot of set changes. And as far as DVDs and stuff, I don't know. I kind of bet there will be, but I haven't heard any specific plans for it.
Can I ask one last question about the tours?
Sure.
I've noticed that through the years, Paul has done certain songs in Europe that he won't do in the U.S. Songs like Come and Get It. Mull of Kintyre, it's certain areas. He will do Mull of Kintyre. But I'm talking about Come and Get It recently, The Word. He did You Won't See Me. I say he. I mean you guys.
Right.
Those songs, is there a reason why he only does it in that area?
That's a good question. I might ask the same question. I don't really know. I mean, I know that, for instance, Hope of Deliverance was big in Latin America and I think Germany, so that's where we played it. We haven't played it here because of that. As far as like Beatle tunes, Come and Get It or You Won't See Me or whatever, I think that was just sort of happenstantial, sort of random. I don't think it's been really that sort of clocked or deliberate. And, those songs have sort of been thrown around. Maybe You Won't See Me or some of those, and who knows, they might end up back in the set list.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know what to say about them.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, surprise us and do Mull of Kintyre here, will ya?
Well, that usually we do with the full-on bagpipe band.
Right.
Certain areas, like say Scotland or some places in Canada, will actually have a bagpipe band, but and the song was a huge hit in certain areas.
Right. Right.
So it's sort of what do you call it? Regionally appropriate, I guess.
Okay.
So, Rusty, it was you that suggested Too Many People?
Yes.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Oh yeah, I love that song. It's cool, right?
Oh, it's a great song. No doubt about it.
It really is.
I wish he'd do more from Ram, but like we said, there's so much in his catalog. He can't do all of them.
You have to kind of look at the whole big picture because it's a worldwide event. It's not just if you have some cult favorite band and you go see them and they that's one thing, but it's like the biggest cult on the planet, kind of. So what did the rest of you think of that clip? Al, what did you think of the clip right there with Rusty Anderson?
Interesting. It's a different dynamic than Lawrence, because in Rusty's case, it's very obvious that that there isn't quite the effort for the members of the group to be kind of like equals, part of an ongoing band. That Paul is very much in charge, but they also you can tell they have a lot of fun together on stage. No question about that.
Yeah, I remember if you listen to the clip, I think it was me that asked the question, what do you do when you're doing a Beatles song? And here you are, you're the lead guitarist. Do you
Yeah.
try to copy what George Harrison did? Or,
Hmm.
and he pretty much said that, you have to inject some of yourself into the performance too, just to kind of
Hmm.
make it your own and still be respectful of the Beatles recording. But I found it really interesting when he said, and I thanked him that he asked Paul to put too many people into the set list. So again, thank you, Rusty. Alan, what did
Yeah.
you think?
Well, I think Al basically covered it. I mean, but the thing is, it is always interesting to hear what the sidemen or collaborators, as the shifting job description of working with Paul tends to go. And Rusty Anderson is a really great guitarist. I mean, I personally feel, I know there are people who are, for some reason that I can't understand, very critical of this band. I think this is in some ways the best band in terms of pure musicianship that he ever worked with, and that includes the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were great being the Beatles, but these guys are really, really polished players who can do anything. I mean, I've been very impressed hearing them. So it was good to hear what he had to say.
And at this point, they know each other so well. They're
Sure.
just a well honed act.
Yeah. Well, Paul has said it himself that now they've been together longer than either the Beatles or Wings. Any cumulatively any of the lineups of Wings. This band has been with him longer.
Right. And even with Wix, it's been even longer than those musicians.
Oh yeah.
Right,
Oh,
right.
absolutely.
Going all the way back to, Flowers in the Dirt.
To
That period.
Flowers in the Dirt. Yeah.
Hmm. Very interesting. All right, I'm going to talk about the clip that I chose. And actually, it wasn't with one of our guests, it was with one of our own. And that being Alan Kozin. We did a show on the Beatles' greatest miracles in the studio, which I thought would be a pretty good idea because there are so many of them. And we all kind of picked our favorites of things that were just beyond belief of what the Beatles achieved in the studio. The one that I personally picked was Strawberry Fields Forever. And so it was sheer delight that when I asked Alan to come up with his number one choice, it turned out to be the same thing that I picked. So he got to speak on behalf of Strawberry Fields Forever. But he couldn't have done a better job, and that's why I chose this particular clip. So let's listen in on it. All right, Alan, I'm going to let you have your choice now, and I'll bet you it's probably my number one choice too, but I'm going to let you have it anyway.
Well, thank you, Ken. Is your number one choice Strawberry Fields?
Yes.
Okay, well, sorry. Yeah, there's something about Strawberry Fields. I just love that track. It could be my favorite Beatles track of all, and that's, as you know, the competition's pretty tough. Strawberry. One of the reasons, possibly, that I feel this way about Strawberry Fields, although I've always loved it from the time it came out, is that thanks to bootlegs, or the miracle of bootlegs, we have basically all of the working materials for Strawberry Fields, starting from when John was in Almeria, Spain, with an acoustic guitar and a cassette recorder. And had one line of the song written. And then, the next tape, he has two or three lines. And it's not until later in the process that, but still in Almeria, where he comes up with the "Let Me Take You Down to Strawberry Fields" part. But then he's got "Nothing to Get Mad About" instead of "Nothing to Get Hung About." It's incredible to see this thing unfolding. And even when they went to Abbey Road and did the first takes, it's beginning with the verse, rather than, "Let Me Take You Down to Strawberry Fields" is really the chorus and the refrain. And it didn't begin with that at first. It began with one of the verses. I think actually it began with a different verse than all of the demos started with. "Living is Easy." But anyway, the thing about Strawberry Fields, it's so incredible, is that it was such a mess. I mean, if you think about the fact that John had done all these demos and you hear a lot of the roots of the song in the demos, then took it into the studio, played it for them on an acoustic guitar, which is beautiful by itself. Then they did the first version, which has that slide, which turns out actually to most likely be a Mellotron, not George. That slide guitar on take one, because there's a Mellotron guitar sound that sounds exactly like that.
Are you sure about
I'm
that,
not
Alan?
sure. I'm not sure about it, but someone made the case and included a tape of the Mellotron sound, and it's very, very close to that sound, which wasn't really the way George sounded. Even when he was playing Slide More, he didn't go for that sharp sound that you hear. But I don't know. It's possibly George. It may very well be the Mellotron. But in any case, and then on the third verse of that first take, they come in with those harmonies like on Because, or, some earlier things like Here, There, and Everywhere, just that beautiful Beatles harmony thing, which astonishingly, when they put out the version of that take on the anthology, they didn't include those vocals. I have no idea why. They're on bootlegs. When they had the Abbey Road show in, I think, 1983, and they played a film with some of these outtakes, they included those vocals, but on the anthology they didn't. And the funny thing is that, it also had that beautifully slinky bass sound, which was apparently George, because Paul was manning the Mellotron. So John took that home, decided he didn't like it, came in, they started again, opening now with Paul's Mellotron flute sounds, which is, a signature part of that, of that song. You hear those flutes, and that's Strawberry Field. It could be nothing else, So they did, 6 or 7 takes of that. They had a decent version, took it home, still didn't like it. Commissioned George Martin to write an orchestral score for which he just used cellos and brass. And I found actually, once Mark Lewison let me look through his listening notes, and and I noted in there that George Martin put in a requisition to be paid for his orchestral score for Strawberry Fields, and he earned a mere £36 on that.
Wow.
So maybe in 1967 it was worth a bit more than it would be now, but still not much. They recorded it that way, an incredible version with, also the Swarmandel, which is a sort of Indian zither that, contributes again to that special sound that Strawberry Fields has. Finished that version. And they started off those sessions doing a drum track with Neil Aspinall and Paul joining in on timpani, and it's a very noisy thing. And they intended to use it partly as the underpinning of the end of the piece, but also to have it played backwards. And that sort of, you hear that in the coda. And you also, when you listen to the raw sessions, you hear John say cranberry sauce very clearly, not once, but twice. And on the finished version, it sounds different because it's slowed down. Those George Martin, when he did his orchestral score, moved the key up because he wanted to get the open strings of the lowest open string of the cellos into the thing because he liked that sound. So he moved it up a key, and it was apparently okay for John to sing. They also took it faster. John takes that home, still doesn't like it, says, I want you to make a version that has bits of both of these. And this is where the miracle really happens. I mean, they did a lot of miracles, but this was just an incredible one. That the one that was in the higher key was also faster, so you could speed up the slower one, slow down the faster one, and the keys met in the middle so that you could make that splice that happens at exactly 1 minute into the song. It just changes texture and goes from the band version, the second version, into the orchestral version with the heavy drums and the Swarmandel, and then George has a guitar solo, and then then it fades out. You get the backwards drums, fades back in with the Mellotron going crazy, and you hear John saying cranberry sauce, although we never knew that he was saying that not at the time, certainly. I thought it sounded to me like he's saying, I'm very bored for some reason, you know?
Mm.
And then when the Paul's dead rumors started, it was, I buried Paul. But he had the greatest explanation of it. He said, listen, John's saying cranberry sauce. And if you knew John, you would know that he was likely to say something like cranberry sauce at any minute. And, you know, so it didn't seem strange to us. But so, you know, then apart from all of that, you know, what we have here is like a technical miracle that this whole thing came together out of, you know, so many attempts into a sort of Frankenstein version that is just perfect. And beyond that, you've got the lyrics. You know, the lyrics are just incredible. You know, for most of us who knew the backstory, we knew what Strawberry Fields was, or technically it's Strawberry Field singular, is that the orphanage, John. But, you know, even if you didn't know that, it's just a nice image that evokes, you know, color in your mind, you know, Strawberry Fields. Wow, you know, and it was just, you know, the song was so sort of early psychedelia, and, you know, Strawberry Fields, nothing is real, nothing to get hung about, sung so laconically, you know, and you keep in mind that they just came off this horrific tour where, you know, they all had a horrible time every place they went. And, you know, even in the U.S. where there was the John and Jesus thing, and they played that show in Memphis and a firecracker went off and everyone turns to see whether John's shot, you know. And it's, you know, and this sort of comes out of that, you know, he's looking at all of these, you know, what they just went through, the fact that they just were not going to do it anymore. They were going to go in the studio. That was going to be their life. And he's just saying, you know, okay, you know, nothing's real, nothing to get hung about. No big deal. We're just doing our thing. And living is easy with eyes closed. You know, it's misunderstanding all you see. It's just great. I can listen to Strawberry Fields over and over and over. And, you know, thanks to the bootlegs, you can listen to it over and over in many, many different ways. So, yeah, so that's my thing about Strawberry Fields. That's my top drawer Beatles miracle.
Well, I can't put it any better than you just did, Alan. But it was my number one choice, too, but the main reason being because of those two different versions. And what is the likelihood that any band is going to record two different takes of a song and have one version be not only faster, but in a higher key, you know, and you'll be able to speed one up and slow one down, and they're going to match. Yeah. And even if we didn't know the history of all this, if you weren't told that, you probably wouldn't know they were two different takes. Right. Because they really are edited together so well.
Yeah.
You know, now it's very obvious because we have the knowledge. You know, it's at that 1 minute point. But it all flows together so well, and it's just an incredibly, it's a marvelous recording. But it's just interesting what you were saying, Alan, about, you know, the key being higher because George Martin wrote an orchestration there for a higher key. So, you know, but it's just remarkable that worked out the way it did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could easily not have worked. But, you know, it's funny if you didn't know all that stuff and you listened to it, you know, with a very sort of analytical musical ear, you would have to say, well, how did they do this? It starts off as a band and then, you know, and then it becomes something completely else. The transition is incredibly smooth, and yet you've got two totally different worlds in this song, and it's not like an orchestra just comes in and joins them. The band to some degree falls out except for the drums, and then George's guitar comes back in, and you know it really is everything after minute one is so different that if you were to try to write a score of how this piece is made, you'd be scratching your head. You know, because it's just so different and so strange.
Yeah. All right. That was an amazing looking back at the whole process of Strawberry Fields Forever.
And what a voice.
What delivery.
Now, was that all off the top of your head there, Alan, or did you just did it just come right out of you naturally?
Pretty much. I mean, I'm not sure exactly whether. I think it was before I did. I ended up doing a Wall Street Journal piece about Strawberry Fields. They have a column called Masterpieces, and normally it's like you write a piece about how a Mozart symphony or a Monteverdi choral work or something was done, and I pitched Strawberry Fields as a masterpiece I wanted to write about, and they were very open to it. And I think actually our show was quite a while before I wrote the piece, and then just sort of revisited, sort of my comments. But I mean, I've been so fascinated with Strawberry Fields for so many years that in a way it was off the top of my head, but I've sort of been delving into Strawberry Fields on and off over the years, listening to all of those outtakes and things like that, and so it's very present for me. I mean, I could do it off the top of my head again if you want me to.
Well, I just think what you said was perfect. You really couldn't top it. So
that was pretty. That was
a fun show. That was a fun show too, because the Beatles do tons of studio miracles, and I think there was a lot for all of us to dig into.
We should do a Studio Miracles Part 2. I think that would be fun.
Yeah. But that particular section was really fascinating, because when I did listen to it, when I listened to it back last week, it's the way he breaks down the chronology of the building of Strawberry Fields Forever is really fascinating listening. At least I think so.
And just the mere fact that so much of what they did just fell into place without it planning to be that way.
Yes.
Right.
That's part of the miracle of it all.
Right. Yeah. So many, almost mistakes that happen to be just the perfect thing. That's so great.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the clip that Al has chose. Al?
Okay. This one is, Alan and I are not really too objective about this, because it's from a friend of ours and a member of the Beatle fan family, going back almost to the very beginning, and that's the interview we did with Rick Glover, who is another one of the senior editors of Beatle Fan, but is also, most people know him as Mr. Fans on the Run. He's one of the guys, along with Bob Gannon, who has probably seen more McCartney and Ringo concerts than probably most of us put together. And the episode that Rick guested on, he talked about, for one thing, meeting Paul at the outside of the Hitsville Museum in Detroit, which was almost totally by accident. But in this particular clip, it was the fact that a little over a year ago, Rick got the opportunity to be called up on stage to meet with Paul. Of course, Paul has known him for a good number of years, because of the fact that he's been at so many shows, and so he's a familiar face, and Paul's crew knows him very well. But this was his particular chance to kind of be in the limelight, and here's the way Rick describes it.
How did it happen? I mean, what happened before to get you up on stage?
Well, I had never made any type of sign other than just the banner that said "Fans on the Run" for all the other shows since the 90s. I'd been making the sign banner for from the audience, just to say hello to Paul, "Fans on the Run." And I realized I was coming up on sort of a milestone of the 135th show there, so I thought it might be I thought it might give him a little kick to see someone out there in the audience that has been to 130 that many shows, and so I did make a special sign for that show that said 135th shows, and then a friend of mine named Dave Takis had made these really, really groovy little Fans on the Run buttons that are a play on the album cover for Wings at the Speed of Sound that says Fans on the Run and this similar artwork from that album cover. And I had given those out to my fellow fans on the run, lots of folks that we've traveled or seen each other at least on the shows over all these years. And David had made a batch of those buttons, and I gave one to a lot of my personal friends. And then throughout the course of the week, I'd run into, well, all the members of the band, Wix, Rusty, Abe, and Brian had already been able to get a button, the Fans on the Run button to those guys, running into them at the hotel or restaurants around towns and things like that. So I thought it'd be really, really great if I could actually hand the bass player one for to complete the set. So I made the sign that said, it's my 135th show. Could I please give you a Fans on the Run button? And Paul saw that. And during the encore break, that's when the security guy for Paul usually comes out and finds the folks that are going to be pulled up on stage. And he was looking around in an area that I was not sitting in and thought, well, he'd chosen someone else. And then all of a sudden, Brian Riddle, the security guy, came from sort of behind the seats and told me that I had been chosen to go up. So we just scurried down the aisle and waited over beside the stage before Paul started coming up. So the answer is I didn't know myself until just a few moments after Paul had left the stage for the encore break.
Wow. Al?
Now, they all, if I'm remembering correctly, they all know you. Because, I mean,
Well,
after all, have all the shows you've been to, and you're always right down front. So I'm assuming after all these years that they know you.
His security folks have seen me a whole lot for sure.
So,
and actually through Facebook, I've been at least chatting back and forth with several of the band members as well.
Sure.
And a lot of his crew do recognize me by sight. Now, when you say do we know each other, or do they know me? Only by sight and a wave at the shows and things like that. I don't bother them or try to distract them from the jobs that they've got to do during the shows. But over the years, we've gotten more and more. It's kind of like seeing old friends that you know casually at least, and a few of them actually do know me. It sounds strange to say this, but know me by name at least because we've chatted so many times over the years.
Yeah, well, Paul certainly does.
Paul mentioned, in fact, that when I was walking out, he says, we know this guy. We've seen him everywhere, or because he's been to 135 shows or something like that.
Sure, you got to tell the story about the Hitsville meeting.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, that happened about, I guess it's been 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
Wow, when we were up at the up in Detroit to see Paul play the concert up there, and all this the details of this story were all in a special issue of Beatles Fan magazine when that happened, and. But I just went to the museum to go to the museum, and as I'm leaving, 4 big SUV limos pulled up, and Paul bounces out of one of them, and then he, this sounds so strange to say it this way without saying, hey, look at me, but Paul got out of the limo and looked like he immediately recognized me and actually introduced me to his wife, Nancy, as the guy that's been to so many shows, and asked me how many I'd been to at that time. But the funniest reaction to that was when she says, "Oh, I know." So
yeah,
they do recognize the fans that are there regularly. I know that for sure.
Sure. You know, he has a really good memory for faces. I've seen it in action myself. I interviewed him in 1990 the first time, and that was really the only time we had met. And a year or more later, he did a press conference at Carnegie Hall because he was going to do the Liverpool Oratorio there. And after he got off stage, he asked the Carnegie security people if that was me and if they could bring me back because he wanted to talk to me about my review of the Liverpool Oratorio. I went to Liverpool to cover it. No, well, it was generally a positive review,
Yeah.
anytime we were giving it a chance because everyone else was so snide about it.
Right.
But I was struck. I mean, I spent maybe an hour or a little more than an hour with the guy over a year before, and he sees millions of people, and why would he remember me? I mean, so I was kind of struck by that because of the number of people that he sees, and so it doesn't surprise me that he recognized you. I mean, you're at so many of the shows and you've got the banner, and and I think he's someone who I think really engages with his fans who are who are seriously sort of devoted to his work. I think he appreciates that as big as he is. It's just something about him.
Well, I think he appreciates it too, and that's one of the reasons that I've done it, to let him know that at least there are still a few of us diehards, certainly enthusiastic fans that want to be there to support him and let him know that we love him and we appreciate the things that he's done for us both, sort of certainly musically and kind of personally. It's affected so many lives in so many ways, and
sure,
I'm certainly one of them that got the effect and never got over it so many years ago.
Rick, I got two questions. First of all, there's a photo that you've posted on Facebook, and it's a close-up of you and Paul. Is that from the Hitsville experience?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, your avatar photo.
Okay.
Where we're shoulder to shoulder outside.
Yeah. Right.
That happened at just as we were leaving. Well, the details on that, when I saw Paul really approaching me, all I had to do was stand still when he was coming there. His security man got between me and Paul, and there were a couple other photographers there from Motown too, and one of them had a large card that looked like he was going to ask for an autograph, basically. And his security guy said, "No autographs here on the. We're just here we're off the clock," or something like that. So I didn't ask him for an autograph at that time because I'd already got his autograph. But when I said, I asked him if I could do a photo with him. He said, "Sure, man, let's do it," and put his arm around my shoulder. And I was trying to do the self-portrait, the selfie thing with the long arm, and my hand was my hand was shaking so bad. Paul noticed that my hand was shaking, and all we were going to get was a blur. So he suggested, well, actually, he told me, and he says, "Give it to him," pointing to the security man. He's good at it. So he's the one that ended up taking the photo of us outside the Motown Museum there.
Very nice. We just heard from Rick Glover talking about his experience going on stage with Paul McCartney and a few other things too related to Paul and the other band members. What do you think, guys? How about you, Steve?
I think some of you guys, Al, for example, I think Rick probably a little better than I do, but just hearing that great story. I mean, him talk about that and getting called up there. I mean, I've interviewed several people that have been called up, and the stories are all great, but Rick's is unique, not for the fact that he's been there, not just for the fact that he's been there so many times at so many shows, but because he is, if there's a definition of fan, Rick is definitely it, and it's not, I mean, there are some people that, go around trying to make names for themselves, but not, Rick is, I mean, the Fans on the Run thing just kind of took off on its own, and it's really a testament to him and his, and to be recognized kind of by the band like that is just very cool. So.
And we could all relate to that. How many of us would love to be in his shoes? Well, some of us may not want to be up on stage in front of thousands of people looking at you. Right. But to be on stage right next to Paul and having Paul acknowledge him, I mean, it's like the dream of a lifetime for so many years. So,
but he was very cool about it.
Yeah.
He was, and the irony is that it wasn't too much longer after that Rick was diagnosed with cancer, which fortunately, a year or so later, he appears to have beaten, which is the ultimate good news.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah, I found it actually very moving to hear him tell that story. You know, I mean, he didn't do it in anything like a mawkish or over dramatic way, but it's just like, okay, this is it's someone who who's met Paul plenty of times, but this was just a special moment, and I really enjoyed hearing him tell it. So maybe it's the accent too.
Yeah, really.
Not only that, but I don't know if you guys caught this, but I know I saw on Facebook that on a fairly recent show that Paul gave, Rick was in the audience and he had his Fans on the Run sign up, and Paul sang Band on the Run and put the words Fans on the Run in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. So that's another great memory for Rick. So
yeah.
So good for you, Rick, and of course, continue with the good health.
Absolutely, all the best, and we'll have you on again soon.
Yeah. Also, I thought maybe if you guys wanted to share in any other particular programs you wanted to make a few comments on that might have been favorites of yours.
One of the other ones I had submitted was that we didn't end up using was the Chaz Newby interview, which was from before my time, but I found it really interesting. I mean, even though he was in the Beatles for basically nanoseconds, those were some interesting nanoseconds that he was there. When they got back from Hamburg and needed a bass player, and I thought it was sort of interesting to hear him because he's a name you read in a book, and hearing him tell his story, his perspective, I thought was just sort of interesting.
Yeah. How about you, Steve?
There were a couple. The Frida Kelly interviews. It was so nice to have her on the show. The couple of times we've had her on, her and Kathy McCabe. But listening to her speak and talk about the Beatles from her perspective, it was just so cool. Another show that was very memorable, and I don't know how we got through that one, was the one with Dave Humphries after Tony Sheridan passed. That was.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, that was very emotional.
And you can hear it. You can hear it in Dave's voice because he's close friends with Tony.
Right. That was an amazing show. I'm looking down the list here. The Chaz Newby was a great one. The Peter Asher one, when he was in Oakland and I was in the hotel room next on the other side of the wall while we were because we had to do this from the hotel room that day, and I remember that was a great one. The Patty Boyd one was another one that I really liked. I do remember one discussion, Ken, between you and I, and this was before Alan Allen came aboard, where we talked about Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah. I remember that one very well because
I can't be a favorite of yours.
I didn't say I was a favorite. I just remember that. I just remember that very well because we were on opposite sides of the fence on that one.
We still are.
I guess we still are.
I listened to the show, and I was thinking, while I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, if these two were in the same room, there would have been a fist fight.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting. That was quite an interesting show. But yeah, those are. I mean, I think I submitted clips from all of those, and we were talking about those. I mean, there have been so many. I mean, to be honest, when we started, Ken, we were just we weren't really positive. I mean, we knew we were going to stay, topical, but we didn't know exactly how it was going to go. And it's really evolved so nicely. I mean, there's been so many great shows. The Chuck Gunderson shows, those have been exceptional. Those have been exceptional. And Chuck, if you're listening, you will be back, my friend.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was funny when we when I don't know that I told you guys this, but when we the Love show, my wife and I got into line, and there in line right next to us was Chuck, and it was like, oh, hello. So I introduced him to my wife, and we talked a little bit there, and that was a very nice moment. And of course, running into meeting Alan for the first time in Vegas was great.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was we had a lot of fun that weekend. That was something. It was hot as hell. I noticed, by the way, I've been keeping track of the temperature. It is now down to, I think it was an 80 or a 90. 80. I think it was 80 the other day, which would have been a lot nicer for everyone concerned. But boy, that's a weekend I'm not going to forget anytime soon. But anyway.
Al, how about you?
Well, what I've got is more of a comment than any particular shows, because I've become a voracious podcast listener. I'm a radio geek anyway, and since there's not that much on radio anymore that's either entertaining or informative, I've kind of gradually transformed over to becoming a listener of podcasts. And I listen, of all types, whether it's sports, politics, music, including the various Beatles podcasts. And I think and including this one, because I listen to these shows as well. And just as a listener, I like this show because we don't do shtick. We don't do elitist, down the nose treatises on the so-called mainstream and how they don't matter.
Except for me.
Right, except for Alan. But that's Alan's job. I mean, he gets paid to do that stuff.
We're paying him?
And no.
He does it very well too.
And really, better than me. And we don't do idle speculation about things that basically never happened. So
all our stuff that we speculate comes true.
Right. Exactly. So so the shows actually that I enjoy probably more than the interview shows are the ones where we do, as I call it, a virtual roundtable. Where we discuss things, whether it's a particular theme or what's happening in the news or whatever. And so just as a listener, I enjoy things we said today very much.
Can I mention a couple of other shows that
Sure.
I really like? The appearances with Candy Leonard. I loved Candy. Candy was a great interview. Candy, if you're listening, thank you. The Spicer, times we've had Bruce Spicer on the show, those are awesome. And one show that sticks in my mind that's probably the geekiest show that we did was the Beatle covers. When Alan and I were going back and forth and Alan revealed his absolutely infinite collection of covers. I love that. I thought that was fantastic, and also the having Billy J and Jude Kessler, and also those were. I mean, I'm almost if I don't mention every single person we've had on, Dave Swenson, Anthony Robustelli. I mean, there have been so many great people that we've had on this show. Mark Lapidus. We've just had so many wonderful guests. We've been really lucky to have all the people we have. So.
Yeah.
Since we're doing some sort of self backpatting, which I guess we're entitled to do on
why not
show. Yeah. I think we've been getting actually more mail than usual at our email address, which, by the way, is thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com, from people who seem to be sort of working their way through the whole collection because they're commenting on things that we did way long ago, and then they'll come back a couple of days later with a comment from another show a few weeks forward. And all of these shows are on iTunes and Podbeam,
right?
YouTube mostly. And so I would encourage anyone who enjoys the show to sort of go back and catch some of the ones you missed, because Some of it is topical and it, more to do with things happening that week. But a lot of these interviews that we've had are in a certain way timeless. It's good information and in some cases stuff that you haven't heard elsewhere.
And there was at least one case where we actually did a show on the fly, and that was the morning that the news broke that Cynthia Lennon had passed. We were scheduled to do a taping anyway, and we decided, on the fly to basically get together and do, very, very much off the cuff, an appreciation of Cynthia Lennon. And that is another one of the shows that as Alan just mentioned, is available online. And it's
that one got a lot of that. There was a real spike in listeners for that show, which was really interesting. And we've also gotten some criticism about some of the stuff that we said in there, like we were trying to be less than reverential to her. And I want to make it clear that we were not. That is not the case. We were discussing the way things were, but we were not trying to be irreverent to
right. And plus we were flying by the seat of our pants on that one because, as I said, we literally had decided on the spur of the moment to do that show. So
right.
Yeah. Well, I have to pretty much agree with what everyone has said here. I love the balance between having shows with interviews and shows that are just us. And I also think that one of the advantages that we have in doing this show almost every single week is that we can talk about what's going on in the news almost immediately after it happens. And so, that's a great advantage in having a show like this. So we're still keeping the news very important. The Beatles are not just pure nostalgia to us. So, for that particular reason, I really appreciate the show with this format. Some of my favorite shows, as I mentioned, the Beatles' Greatest Miracles I liked a lot. Many of the interviews, there's so many really good interviews in the early period when it was just Steve and me. And I always remember there was a period of something like 2 months when it was one author after another who had a new book out. And I was just so worn out from reading, week after week, all these new books. And every single one of them were good. We've been very fortunate in recent years to have excellent books come out, whether it's Mark Lewison or Kevin Howlett, Jim Birkenstadt's book on Jimmy Nicol. He was a really good interview, too. Chuck Gunderson, we've said before. Kid O'Toole, Jude Kessler, when it was, all of us here. But there's so many really good interviews that we've done. It's something really to be proud of. Dave Swenson.
Sure.
And actually, one show that I was not in that I really enjoyed was the one when Dave Morrell was on the show. Because he's not only a Beatle fan, but he's also an industry insider who could talk about, what the music industry is like and some of the experiences that he's had. As someone who worked at a record company and had to deal with radio stations and promoting stuff, I really like that show a lot. There's just so many really good shows. You mentioned, as far as geeky, Steve, the cover versions. I liked when we mentioned the artists that we'd like to see the Beatles work with, or in the case of John and George, if they were still alive, who we'd like to see them work with. And we did like 2 shows of that, and that was a lot of fun to do. So, it's having this variety in the show where we can pretty much talk about almost anything we want to talk about. There's hardly anything we've ever disagreed on as far as the topic. That's pretty good. 99% of the topics we agree on here on this show. So that's the strength of having the 4 of us do this every week.
You mentioned one thing earlier about the news after show that I think should be mentioned is that we have, there are 4 of us, 2 of us who have solid news business connections, and 2 of us who have solid music connections. So we've got both perspectives. Alan and I have been in the news business. I've worked for daily newspapers, currently write for, respected publications. And you guys, and Ken, you have been in the radio business. And Al, you've, been with Beatle fan and with the fest. I mean, there's and your background has other connections too. I mean, there's a lot of experience among us. We maybe we've got the experience. So I think that lends a lot to the conversation as well.
And not only that, I mean, I've never talked about this openly with my listeners, but and I don't want this to come across as being a knock on a previous show that I was on, but I do feel that if you're going to do a show on the Beatles, if you can do it, you should have at least one person in the show that lived through it and really experienced it and can share those memories. I was born in 1959. I have a lot of very vivid memories of the 60s as a little kid, but I didn't fully absorb it, the way a teenager or maybe someone in their 20s did. But it's nice to have other people that you're working with that can add that perspective to what it was like. And it's also important to have the perspective of younger people too, because, we're going to be passing the torch to younger people in radio who never lived through the 60s, never lived through the height of the solo Beatles popularity, and they have their own take on it. And we might not agree with their perspective on it. But it's interesting to have different opinions. But I do think that it is important, if you can do it, to have someone. In this case, I have 3 other people here who remember the 60s far better than I could. So, I think that's a strength to the show.
Absolutely, yeah.
And now we can reveal, Ken, that it never really happened. Okay. The moon landing was real. The moon landing was real, but the rest of the 60s were
The rest
fake.
of it was a dream.
There we go. Oh, well.
Really, there was only Motown in the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was it. I think so.
Motown and Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods.
No, that's 70s.
Oh, okay.
All right, so before we go, I just want to make sure, because it's very easy for me to forget things, to thank a few people. First of all, there's a guy named Michael Lynch, who has been a guest here on this show several times.
Thank you, Michael.
Who also composed our music theme that you hear at the very beginning, at the very end, and all of you listening have said to us how catchy that song is and how, you can't get that out of your head after you listen to our show. But to thank Michael for composing that theme for us and for being a great guest, and we'll probably have you on again. Also want to thank Darren DeVivo and Tom Frangione for being semi-regulars here on this show and adding so much to the conversations here. And also to thank all the listeners who have been with us, whether from the beginning or whether you're newbies, because we really appreciate having you here, and it's because of your reaction to our records that really matters.
We've been getting, yeah, I know. We've been getting a couple thousands of downloads every week, so we appreciate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay. So, do any of us want to just plug anything before we go?
Steve, you had a couple of news things, didn't you?
Boy, we had looked through the Billboard charts, and I took them off my screen.
We should point out, especially for those people who have been calling 8 days a week Anthology Light, and all this nonsense,
right?
That the film has now been held over for a 3rd week with even more theaters added on. So there were missed opportunities. It's not by any means perfect. It is, it's probably a little too aimed at millennials, but as in the case of at least one other Beatles album that will go on unmentioned, you can't fight success.
That's
right.
And at least at this point, 8 days a week has been a surprise box office success.
Yeah, I just did a story for Billboard that you should find online that has comments from the distributor and from somebody that deals with box office data, and they both said that the film had done very well, considering it was it was basically a limited engagement film.
Yeah.
And the demand for the film and also the fact that Hulu picked it up the day after it
Right.
came into the theaters, which that still astonishes me that it's doing that well because people can pick it up at home. I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that it's streaming and it's still it has staying power in the theater is something to be noticed. And
Yeah.
The
that's
fact that,
really
that any documentary of any kind could be in the movie
Hmm.
theaters for this long, and we're talking 3 weeks.
Oh,
That
right.
that is amazing to itself.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's usually the controversial documentaries or the political documentaries that get that kind of stuff. That's not the case here at all. So,
Right. Like a Michael Moore,
right,
something like that.
exactly,
But
exactly.
I mean, I'm sure that the fact that they're showing the 30-minute cut of Shea Stadium, I'm sure that's a little bit of an inducement, but still,
Sure.
I think there are a lot of people that are going to see it that I have no idea about the Shea Stadium cut. At this point, they're dare I say it, casual fans who just want to see the film.
Right. So catch it while you can. Catch it while you can. To twist the name of a Dave Clark 5 song, but because it will not be there forever. And when it comes
Right.
out on DVD, you won't get the Shea stuff.
Right.
At
Yeah.
least not in that format. That's according to what we're hearing. So, but in any event, there we go.
Okay. So if you want to get in touch with us, Steve, why don't you tell the folks for you how they can do so?
Well, as Alan said earlier, the show can be reached at Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. We'd love to hear your praise or your criticism or ideas for the show. You can get me at BeatlesExaminer at gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, as a bunch of people have found out this week, and I have a news group. Oh, I won't. I should say. Well, I don't know if I should say it here, but I get into political discussions, and I've been hearing from that this week. But I also have a Beatles news group that I promise won't get political, or at least I hope not. And it's Beatles news and commentary, and it's got 4,000 members now. I mean, we got quite a group there,
Wow.
and so come on board and we'll talk Beatles news.
All right, Alan, how about you?
You can find me on Facebook as well, either under Alan Cozen or Alan Cozen Remixed. And send me a note, make a comment. I'll get back to you.
All right, Al?
And you can find me on Facebook also under Al Sussman, or on Twitter at ASUSS49. Or you can get in touch with me through Beatle Fan Magazine, www.beatlefan.com.
And as for me, Ken Michaels, you can email me directly at everylittlething@att.net. You can also check out my website, which is kenmichaelsradio.com. Just a couple of things about the website. On my weekly Beatles trivia and games page, I am now giving away the Beatles Live at the Hollywood Bowl CD. Also, I'm giving away a pair of tickets to see Chad and Jeremy in concert live at Daryl's house in Pauling, New York. And by the way, if you happen to have read Steve's own article on Chad and Jeremy, they did announce that they're scaling back their touring. So if you want to see them, and I could tell you, I first caught them in concert about 10 years ago, and I swear, if you close your eyes, they sound exactly the same, just 50 years older.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just amazing how, vocally they could do this stuff in their sleep. But
Can I
yeah.
interject something? I just found out today, for those of you thinking about going to Chad and Jeremy, that they will be selling a special CD at their shows, an anthology. So there's another reason to go see them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, the tickets that I have is for Daryl's house on October the 13th. And if you visit the concerts and events page on my website, it explains how you can win. It's really simple. So apart from seeing great performers like Chad and Jeremy, Denny Lane, I just gave tickets away, you get to see some of the great venues in the New England area. So if you live in that area, I'm really happy to be exposing people to some of these venues. And one more thing, I was just interviewed by a fellow Beatle DJ by the name of Steve Ludwig, who has a show called The Beatles Hour, and it's on his own website where you can find a lot of interviews that he's done with lots of celebrities, which is Planet Ludwig, as in Ludwig drums, planetludwig.com. Click on The Beatles Hour, and you can hear a full interview with me and playing some Beatles music too in the show. Steve did a great job. Thank you for having me on, Steve. And so if you want to check that out, again, that's planetludwig.com.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far back his archives go, but he did interview me back in, I guess it was in 2013 when Changing Times came out.
Ah.
Yeah, but again, I don't know how far back his archives go.
We'll have to check his website to see.
Yeah.
Anything else anyone wants to add?
Nope. Just come back and listen to us again next week.
Right.
So on behalf of Steve Marinucci, Alan Kozin, and Al Sussman, this is Ken Michaels thanking all of you for supporting things we said today. And we will see you next time.